"That's not a deer." She froze, standing only a few yards away. What she first believed to be a deer slowly began walking toward her, on two legs. Its mouth slowly opened, revealing long, yellowed canine teeth. Thick strands of saliva hung between its jaws. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. She was certain it was coming for her. For centuries, people throughout the Appalachian Mountains have reported encounters with something they simply call the not deer. At first glance, it resembles one of the most common animals in North America. But witnesses say something is always wrong. The proportions, the movement, the eyes, and in the most disturbing reports, they don't stay on four legs. Tonight, we'll examine some of the most chilling not deer encounters ever reported and ask a simple question. What if some things in the Appalachian woods are only pretending to be deer? Encounter 1. Georgia Mountains. My family owns a cabin in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, about halfway between Chattanooga and Atlanta. Every so often, we'd spend a weekend there just to get away from everything. One evening, my cousin and I decided to take a drive through the mountains before heading back to the cabin. We had spent hours winding through the back roads, stopping at overlooks and enjoying the scenery. By the time we started heading home, the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. It was around 8 o'clock. The roads were nearly empty. The forest on both sides had become little more than walls of darkness. We had both grown up around wildlife. Seeing deer wasn't unusual. If anything, we expected it. As we rounded another bend, my headlights caught movement on the shoulder. A deer stood just off the road. I slowed down automatically. Instead of running, it stepped into the middle of the road. I came to a stop. For a few seconds, it simply stood there. It began to rise, not like a deer rearing up, not jumping. It slowly lifted itself onto its back legs. Both of us just stared. Neither of us spoke. It stood there, balanced on two legs. Its front legs weren't really legs anymore. They looked almost like arms. Long. Too long. Its upper body looked strangely human. Only the head still resembled a deer. Everything about it looked wrong. Its joints didn't bend naturally. Every movement looked awkward. Almost as if whatever it was had never learned how a deer was supposed to move. Neither of us had ever seen anything remotely like it. We had hunted, camped, spent our entire lives around wildlife. Nothing prepared us for that moment. The creature remained standing in the road, watching us. I don't remember deciding to leave. I only remember pressing the accelerator. Neither of us spoke again until we reached the cabin. Even now, years later, neither of us can explain what stood in front of our truck that night. But one thing is certain. It wasn't behaving like any deer we'd ever seen. At first, these encounters seemed impossible, but more and more encounters have been reported. Encounter 2, Kentucky Route 10. 3 weeks ago, I was driving home toward Cincinnati. Instead of taking the interstate, I decided to take Kentucky Route 10 through the countryside. It was dusk, that time of evening when deer begin moving through the fields before darkness settles in. As I drove, I noticed several deer grazing off to my left, nothing unusual. Then, one of them caught my attention. At first, I couldn't explain why. It still looked like a deer, but something immediately felt wrong before I even figured out what I was seeing. My stomach dropped. It was a fear unlike anything I'd experienced before. The deer stood closer to the road than the others. As I looked more carefully, the proportions didn't make sense. Its hind legs looked short, almost squat, but its front legs, they were much longer, almost ape-like. Its neck stretched unnaturally high above its body. Everything about it looked distorted, like someone had tried to build a deer from memory and gotten nearly every proportion wrong. Then something happened that frightened me even more. Both of my dogs suddenly became restless. They began trembling. Neither barked. Neither growled. They simply stared toward the creature and started whining. I kept driving. I never stopped. I never looked back. That overwhelming feeling of dread stayed with me the entire drive. It wasn't until I crossed the Ohio River, leaving Kentucky behind, that the feeling finally began to fade. Looking back, I still can't explain why seeing that animal affected me the way it did. I've seen deer my entire life, but whatever stood in that field wasn't like any deer I'd ever encountered. It makes you wonder, what are these people seeing? Encounter 3, Skyline Drive, Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. The next encounter comes from Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. At the time, the witness was riding his motorcycle along Skyline Drive late one evening. Anyone who's traveled that road after dark knows how isolated it can feel. Your headlight only illuminates a small stretch of pavement. Beyond that, everything disappears into darkness. The witness had been riding for quite some time when something reflected in his headlight. Eyes. Standing on the mountainside beside the road was what he first believed to be a deer. He slowed the motorcycle. Curious. It wasn't uncommon to see deer throughout the park. As the headlight reached the animal, he immediately realized something wasn't right. Later, he described it in a way that's difficult to forget. It looked like a deer drawn by someone who had never actually seen a deer. The animal was enormous, easily the largest deer he'd ever encountered. The head looked almost bovine. The chest was unnaturally wide. Its legs were far too long for its body. Everything about its proportions seemed wrong. He estimated it was a doe. There were no antlers. Still, something about it made every instinct tell him to keep his distance. He slowly crossed into the opposite lane to give the animal plenty of room. Then, without warning, it stood up, not for a split second, not to jump. It slowly rose onto its hind legs. Its front legs hung awkwardly at its sides. It took one step, then another. Every movement looked stiff, jerky, almost mechanical, as though it had never learned how to walk that way. Then, it violently shook its head, like a dog thrashing a toy. The witness remained frozen on his motorcycle, unable to understand what he was seeing. The creature suddenly began hopping, still on two legs. One hop, then another, until it disappeared into the darkness on the opposite side of the road. For several seconds, everything became silent, curious. The witness turned his motorcycle toward the edge of the roadway and aimed his headlight into the darkness. Nothing. Then, movement. Its head slowly appeared above the edge of the mountainside, still watching him. The witness later estimated the drop below the road was nearly 50 feet. There is no place the creature could have been standing, yet somehow, it remained there, looking directly at him. He didn't stay any longer. He started the motorcycle and left. Years later, he still couldn't explain what he encountered along Skyline Drive that night. Encounter 4, the hunter. The next report comes from an experienced hunter, a man who had spent decades in the woods, someone who knew exactly how deer behaved. One afternoon, he spotted what appeared to be an unusually large doe moving through the trees. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until the animal began running. Experienced hunters know something about deer. When they flee, they look where they're going. This one didn't. As it ran, its head remained turned completely toward him, watching him the entire time. The hunter hesitated. His father, who was hunting nearby, noticed the same thing. Later, he would ask a simple question. When have you ever seen a deer look at you while it's running away? Neither of them had, believing he had a clear shot. The hunter raised his .30-06 rifle. He fired. The deer stumbled. He fired again. This time, the animal collapsed. Certain it was down, the two men carefully approached, but when they reached the spot, there was nothing there. No deer, no blood, no drag marks, no tracks leading away, nothing. They searched the area, again and again. The animal had simply vanished. The hunter later admitted that experience changed the way he looked at the woods. He had spent his entire life trusting what he knew about wildlife. After that day, he wasn't so sure anymore. Encounter 5, My Grandmother's Property. The final encounter comes from a witness visiting his grandmother's home. It was an ordinary afternoon. His grandmother lived in a rural area where deer were common visitors. In fact, she enjoyed feeding them. Seeing deer wander into the yard had become part of everyday life. Nothing about that afternoon seemed unusual. The witness happened to look out toward the backyard. Several deer stood feeding near the edge of the woods. Then, one of them caught his attention. At first, he couldn't explain why, but something about it immediately felt wrong. Its movements weren't smooth. As the others lowered their heads to feed, this one simply stood there, watching. Its eyes never seemed to leave the house. Curious, the witness stepped a little closer to the window. The deer slowly turned its head, meeting his gaze. For several long seconds, neither of them looked away. Then, it began to move. Its front legs seemed stiff. Its steps were awkward, almost as though every movement required conscious effort. The witness later said it reminded him of someone pretending to be a deer, without fully understanding how one should walk. Then, without warning, the animal slowly rose onto its back legs. There was no panic, no sudden movement. It simply stood, balanced upright. Its body swayed slightly as it took several slow steps forward. The witness stood frozen, unable to understand what he was seeing. The creature lowered itself back onto all fours, turned, and disappeared into the tree line. For a while, everything seemed normal again. The witness tried convincing himself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the light had distorted what he saw. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on him. Hours passed. Night fell. The family settled inside for the evening. Then, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Everyone looked toward the back window. Standing just outside the glass was the same deer. It wasn't feeding. It wasn't wandering. It was staring directly inside. The witness slowly approached the window. The animal never blinked, never looked away. It slowly raised one front hoof and dragged it across the glass. A long scraping sound echoed through the room. No one moved. No one spoke. The deer remained there for several more seconds, watching. It slowly turned, walked back toward the woods. Every few steps, it stopped, turned its head, and looked back toward the house, until it finally disappeared into the darkness beneath the trees. The witness said he never looked at deer the same way again. Whenever he sees one standing motionless near the woods, he can't help wondering if it's really a deer at all. Final field assessment. Warden Field Report Entity. Designation: not deer. Classification: unknown. Cervid mimic threat. Assessment: moderate common witness reports. Incorrect body proportions. Unnaturally long limbs. Forward-facing or unusually intelligent eyes. Standing or walking on two legs. Jerky, unnatural movement. Prolonged eye contact. Fearless behavior toward humans. Overwhelming feelings of dread. Animals reacting with fear or silence. Whether these encounters represent an undiscovered species, modern folklore, or something still unexplained, remains unknown. But one detail continues to appear throughout nearly every report. The witnesses don't simply describe seeing an unusual deer. They describe the unmistakable feeling that whatever they were looking at only wanted them to believe it was a deer. Perhaps every encounter you've heard tonight has an ordinary explanation. Perhaps unusual injuries, genetic abnormalities, or simple misidentification are enough to explain every story. Or perhaps, every so often, something else walks the forests of Appalachia. Something that wears a familiar shape. Something that watches from the tree line, waiting for you to convince yourself that it's only a deer. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and if you ever find yourself alone on a quiet Appalachian road, take one last look at the deer standing beside it. Just make sure it stays on four legs